So this video is on the notes on graphing cosine. So here's a general equation of a cosine graph. Y is equal to A times the quantity times the cosine of B times the quantity X minus H plus K. The A is your amplitude. That's how high above or below your center, okay, like your zero, your graph is going. It is, we always consider it as an absolute value of it. So whether it's positive or negative, the amplitude is always going to be given as a positive. The A being negative is going to affect the direction that you're going to be going in your graph, but the distance above or below is still going to remain the same. The B is the number of complete cycles of a cosine in 2 pi distance. So a normal period, as I state over here, a normal period is equal to 2 pi. But when you have it adjusted, it's going to be 2 pi divided by B, divided by how many cycles you have in 2 pi distance. The X minus H is going to be showing us the phase shift left or right. The plus K is going to be showing us our vertical shift, or up or down. Now, when we are talking about the cosine graph, I'm going to be graphing 5 points. This point, this point, this point, this point, and I'll do it in orange back to that point. So the coordinates of these, 1, 0, 0, 1, -1, 0, 0, -1, and back to 1, 0 again. Now, in terms of our radians, I'm starting at 0 radians. I'm just going to write it here, 0 radians. This is pi halves radians. This is pi radians. This is at 3 pi halves radians, and back here to 2 pi. Now your cosine is the x coordinate. So I'm going to be graphing 1, 0, -1, 0, back to 1. So when we are looking at the table below, again, my x coordinate at the radian of 0 is my cosine, which is 1. Up at pi halves, my cosine is 0. Over here at pi, my cosine is a -1. Down here at 3 pi halves, my cosine is 0. And over here at 2 pi, it goes back to the same spot, so it's 1. So we're going to be starting and ending at 1. Okay, halfway in between is going to be -1, and in between those is going to be a 0 and a 0. So we're going to try doing a couple of graphs. So on this first one here, okay, just plain old cosine graph. What we're going to do is identify all the pieces. So my amplitude is 1, because there's nothing in front of my cosine. My vertical shift, none, because there's not something being added to this or subtracted from this. My phase shift is going to be none, because nothing is happening to my x. And my period is going to be 2 pi, because there is nothing in front of my x. So it's going to stay just 2 pi. So when I graph this, I am going to have 5 markings, okay? My first one's going to be here on my y-axis. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My period is 2 pi, so I'm going to go from 0 to 2 pi. My vertical shift is none. So this is where my zeros are going to be. They're going to be on my x-axis. My amplitude is 1, so I'm going to go 1 above and 1 below. So my high and my low. My high is going to occur at 1. My low is going to occur at -1. Then I'm going to graph my points. Now, when I'm graphing these points, I am going to start on my first one here, my 0. Remember, I start at 1, I end at 1. My sine, I start and end at 0. But for this, my cosine, I start at 1, I end at 1. So I kind of think of this as high to high or low to low if it's a negative cosine. Now, halfway in between, I'm down at my low. That was my -1. And then between here is my 0 and again, my 0. Now, to draw this, let me just demonstrate real quick on Desmos. This is my sine graph, okay? So here you see from 0 to 2 pi. This is my cosine graph, okay? You'll notice that they're really the same shape, but they're shifted. So if I was to draw on my, I'm going to draw on my, let me draw actually on my sine graph. Okay. So let me do it in kind of a brighter color for us to see. Okay, I'll do a bright green. So I'm going to draw on my sine graph. Okay, so that's like one full cycle of sine. Now, if I shift this, now remember, when I'm shifting this, I just did my sine graph. Okay, that was my sine graph, okay, that I colored. If I move this, you can see it fits on top of the cosine. And the sine. They are the same. They're just a shift. It's being shifted basically pi halves distance away from each other, okay? So the reason I'm bringing this up is just when we're drawing these, let me get rid of that. Oops. When we're drawing these, you want to be careful when you draw this, that you don't draw this as like a V. It is still a curve. So what's happening is this is kind of like the bottom part of a sine graph. This is like the top part. This is like the top part here. So it should be a curve, not a V. And it's not a parabola type shape, okay? So on the next one, my amplitude is 3. My vertical shift, none. My phase shift, none. My period, 2 pi. And again, my vertical shift, none, because there is nothing added or subtracted out here. My phase shift, none, because nothing's happening here. And then my period, 2 pi, because there's nothing in front of my x. Okay, so now I'm going to graph this. And when I graph this, I have no vertical shifts. So that means that my zeros are going to be on my x-axis. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My period is going to be 2 pi, from 0 to 2 pi. My amplitude is 3. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 above, 1, 2, 3 below. And so my high is going to be at 3 and my low is going to be at -3. And then when I'm graphing this, remember my cosine starts at 1 and ends at 1. So it's going to start at 3 and end at 3. And then halfway in between, that's where my low is. And then in between these, I'm at my 0. And then in between these, I'm at my 0. And there we go. And again, remember, this is like part of the sine graph, and then it's going up to the next part. And same with that. On the next one, y is equal to negative cosine of x minus 3. So on this one, my amplitude is 2. It's always the absolute value of that. So it's going to be 2. My vertical shift is that negative 3. So I'm going to go down 3. My phase shift, none, because nothing's happening to my x. And my period is still 2 pi because I don't have anything in front of this. Okay. So when I get my graph, I want to adjust it because I'm going to be going down 1, 2, 3. So here at negative 3, that is my vertical shift. Okay. So that is where my zeros are going to be. Now my amplitude was 2, so I'm going to go 2 above, which puts me at negative 1, and 2 below, which puts me at negative 5. And that's going to be where my high and my low are. Now, again, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 marks, and this is going to be a 2 pi. Now, when I'm graphing this is a negative. So that does affect the graph. It's not going to affect my amplitude, but it does affect my graph. So instead of starting at the high, I'm going to start at the low. So I'm going to start here and end here. And then halfway in between, I'm going to be up at the high. And then halfway in between, I'm at my 0. And again here, halfway in between, I'm at my 0. And again, it's really part of a sine graph. Okay, last two. So on the next one, if I'm going to be graphing this one, my amplitude is a 3. My vertical shift is up 1 because of the +1. My phase shift is going to be right pi halves. I'm going to be starting at pi halves. And my period is still 2 pi because I have nothing going on. So just real quick, just so we understand, when I'm dealing with this phase shift, the phase shift comes from whatever makes that 0, and pi halves makes it 0. Now, this one's going to be a little adjusted. I'm not going to go from 0 to 2 pi. I am starting at pi halves. That is my start of my cycle. I'm going to add 2 pi onto it, which is my period, to see where I end. So when I add 2 pi onto pi halves, 2 pi I can really write as a 4 pi halves. So really I have a pi halves plus 4 pi halves, which is a 5 pi halves. So I'm starting at pi halves, ending at 5 pi halves. So for this graph, I'm going to be starting up at 1. That is going to be my vertical shift. And then I'm going to be going 1, 2, 3 above that. So I'm going to be up at 4. And be careful here, 1, which puts me on the x-axis, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to be down at -3. So I am going to have a high at 4 and a low at -3. And then when I'm graphing these, it's a positive cosine. So I'm going to start at the high, I'm going to start 4. Whoops, forgot to put my, hold on, forgot to put my 2. So for this, I am not starting at my 0. I'm starting at pi halves. And so that's my first mark, second, third, fourth, fifth, and this is going to be at 5 pi halves. And then I am going to try to solve this. So for this, my high is at pi halves because that's my start. And I end at that same spot. Then halfway between, I'm going to be at my low. And then halfway between these, I'm at my 0. And then halfway between these, also at my 0. And I've graphed that. And there's my cosine. Last one for this, my amplitude is 4. My vertical shift is up 1 because of +1. My phase shift is pi 6 because that's what makes that 0, this 0. And then because I have this 2 in front, that means I have 2 complete cycles within that normal 2 pi distance. So I take 2 pi divided by 2, which means my period is pi. So I am going to be starting at pi 6. I'm going to be adding pi, which is my period. And that's really 6 pi 6. So I'm going to end at 7 pi 6. So let's see, I'm going to start at 1. Okay, that is going to be where my zeros are. I am going to be going 1, 2, 3, 4 above, which puts me up at 5. And 1, 2, 3, 4 below, which puts me down at -3. Now I'm starting at pi 6. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm ending at 7 pi 6. And my high is going to be at this 5. And my low is going to be at this -3. This is a positive cosine. So I am going to be starting at the high. So here at pi 6, I'm starting at the high, ending at the high. Halfway in between is my low. And then I've got my 0 and my 0. And we graph it. And there's our graph. So hopefully this helps you out for those who are absent today.